And we're back for the last lecture of this course, actually. The last lecture, part one of the last lecture in the last module of this course. And right now I want to talk to you about US foreign policy. What is it? Why is it important? Let's do some comparison here, first of all. What is how are we doing here in this country versus the rest of the world? As you can see, population of the United States a little over 300 million, only about 4.5% of the world's population of over 7 billion. Life expectancy in the United States at birth about 78 years. Globally, the life expectancy is about 68 years. So we beat that by about 10 years. Look at meat consumption. Despite being only less than 5% of the world's population, we consume nearly a third of the world's meat. I don't know if that's good or bad. I mean, maybe it's not great for health wise, but it is a testament to our wealth, I would say. Budget spent on food, average American spends a little under 10% of their overall budget on food, versus globally more than a third of a person's budget is spent on food, which again speaks to the fact that we have much more disposable income. Look at oil consumption. Again, with only 5% of the world's population, we consume about 1/4 of the world's oil. Of course, this number for the rest of the world is going to increase, and that's probably going to drive the price of gasoline up over the next years, which is, it's been sort of the way it's been going for a long time now. I think, though, it's fair to say, and as much as people may complain about things are, and we do have problems. If you made it this far in the course, we've talked about a lot of them, but overall, the average American is living better than most people in the world. The average American is living better than any human beings have ever lived in the history of planet Earth. And we sort of forget that sometimes. But let's talk about a little bit of history now, talk about the foreign policy we've had through the years. Obviously, when George Washington left office in 1797, in his farewell address, he warned us against entangling alliances and he warned us against political parties. I think it's fair to say we ignored his advice on both of those areas. Though for the 19th century, we were somewhat more isolationist than we are today. Our general policy was to avoid European wars, but increase international trade. Washington did, for instance, advise us to increase international trade. So I think we did listen to him on that. And so, of course, worth mentioning too, at the time of the founding, U.S. foreign policy was a whole lot smaller than it is today, mostly Native Americans plus the European powers, Britain, France, Spain, etc., and some other European states. And this changed some in the 19th century. We get towards the middle to later 19th century. It's the age of imperialism. So the European powers, many of them are jockeying for position, and we kind of get in on that for a little bit too. 20th century, though, this is more or less reversed. We become more involved in the rest of the world. How does this happen? Well, this is again a thumbnail sketch. We could spend quite a bit of time talking about Theodore Roosevelt here. Certainly he played a role in that, or William McKinley, but we're going to talk right now about Woodrow Wilson. So Wilson was president from 1913 to 1921. And he was president when World War I was being fought. Probably know when World War I broke out in Europe in 1914, the United States did not get involved. We don't end up entering the war until 1917. Why do we enter the war? Well, there's a number of factors, Zimmermann telegram, the Lusitania, but there is also, from Wilson's point of view, a philosophical reason. We want the world to be safe for democracy. Wilson's ideology was that the world should be a world of democracy, of free trade, and of capitalism. And with the war in Europe, he saw an opportunity to make that reality, or at least try to make it reality. And obviously, he knew that in order to have any kind of say in the post-war settlement, we would have to have skin in the game. We would have to get involved in the war, because you can't sit out the whole war and then afterwards swoop in and tell everybody, how things are going to be done, they're not going to listen. If you took part in the war, fought alongside the victors, then they will usually consider your point of view. So he had a vision for what he called the 14 points, which were mostly about self-determination and freedom, at least for Europeans. But he also had a vision for a League of Nations. Ultimately, as you probably know, the League of Nations is formed, but the United States does not join it. The Senate rejects the treaty that would have had us join the League of Nations out of fear of loss of sovereignty. And by 1920s, most Americans have concluded that World War I was a mistake. But the end result of World War I, should be mentioned, really is a redrawing of the world map. The Ottoman Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, both of these are gone now. Europe is recarved up again. Also, a result of World War I, we get the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, which results in Russia becoming a communist state, which it would remain until 1990-ish. So Cold War seeds are planted here as well. As I said, though, after World War I, most Americans conclude that our involvement in it had been a mistake. And so we take a more isolationist turn. Because after World War I, we get the 1920s. You know, we got bootleg gin, jazz music, Model Ts, radio, nightclubs, flappers. Is it time to party hard? The economy's great, probably going to be great forever, right? So party hard. Let's not worry about what's going on. Of course, 1929, crash, the stock market, economy crashes. We enter into the Great Depression. So at that point, you know, we've got our own problems to deal with here. We can't really be worrying about what's going on over in Europe or Asia, or so we think. And so we don't, for the most part, worry about what's going on there, because surely what's happening there can never affect us, right? Right. The lesson we took from World War I is we're too quick to jump in to war and too quick to jump in other people's affairs. So as human beings tend to do, we overcorrected and moved too far in the other direction, and we just stuck our heads in the sand probably. And of course that can also blow up in your face, as you see when we get World War II. Now, you probably know World War II is usually considered, there's different definitions of this, but generally it's considered to have begun on September 1st, 1939, with the invasion of Poland by Germany. But the United States, once again, is not involved at first. We don't get involved until December 7th, 1941, or militarily involved at least, when Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. And that leads us to enter the war. And so the Allies in World War II are the United States, Britain, France, the Soviet Union, and China. On the other side would be the Axis powers, primarily Germany, Italy, and Japan. How does the war, and we don't need to talk too much in detail here. You should take my modern U.S. history class. We'll talk about this in a whole lot more detail. But how does it end? Well, as you probably know, with nuclear weapons. Japan, the cities of Nagasaki and Hiroshima are nuked, and that officially ends World War II, effectively ends World War II, but also begins the atomic age. Post-World War II, the United Nations is founded, the idea behind it being to prevent another world war, which we'll talk about. Do we get another world war? So far, no, but we do get the Cold War. So, Soviet Union was our ally during World War II, but it was a marriage of convenience. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, is the governing philosophy here. The Soviet Union was fighting a war against Germany. Well, so are we, so it makes sense for us to be allies. But once Germany's defeated, we no longer have a common enemy. So, U.S. and the Soviet Union are the two victors of World War II, and they are the two world powers which are left after World War II when the smoke clears. And so next logical conflict will be between them to be the sole world power. And so the Cold War was basically that. On the one hand, you have the United States, our allies, Western Europe, Canada, parts of Asia, parts of Latin America, mostly capitalist democracies, though not always. Some of these were pretty, like Chile, for example, some of these were pretty oppressive regimes too, but they were on our side. The other side was Soviet Union, Warsaw Bloc, all these the communist states. But the Soviet Union develops nuclear weapons of their own. So we can't really go to war against them. If we do, we're all going to be, as Eisenhower, as Einstein is quoted as perhaps apocryphally quoted as saying. Someone asked him once what weapons World War III would be fought with, and he said he didn't know, but World War IV would be fought with sticks and stones. So the point he was making is it throws back to the Stone Age. So how do we contain, what do we do about communism? Truman adopts a policy called the Truman Doctrine based on George Kennan's long telegram. And Kennan argued that to think of communism as cancer. It can be, we cannot allow it to spread. We can contain it though. So we can't directly attack the Soviet Union or any of their allies, because if we do, we get World War III and we're all dead. What we can do, though, is state that it will exist within its current borders. And if it tries to expand, we will stop it by providing financial aid, intelligence, military supplies, possibly, if it comes to it, even ground troops to any people anywhere in the world who are fighting against communism. We are also going to pump billions of dollars into rebuilding the economies of Western Europe post-World War II. Why? Is it because we're nice? I mean, it's nice to do it, but we weren't doing it because we care. We were doing it because we wanted to bring them over to our side, to keep them under our umbrella. When you are starving, as many people were in Europe at the time, you do not question the hand that feeds you. So if we don't go in there and help them, the Soviets are. And if the Soviets do, once they get in there, they're not going to leave. So this was really about expanding our influence in Europe, and ultimately it works. And of course, by the way, too, we had most of the manufacturing capacity in the world at this point because Europe and Asia were mostly leveled by the war. So all the money that's being spent in Europe, a lot of it is being spent on American stuff. So a lot of it's coming back here anyway. So the sides are sort of clearly divided. In 1948, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or I'm sorry, 1949, I should say, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is formed, called NATO. And this is an alliance, military alliance of the United States, Canada, most of the Western European democracies, also Greece and Turkey are in there. And they're basically to serve as a deterrent against the Soviet Union. If one country gets attacked, then they all get attacked. And this is the idea here, is to serve as a sort of mutual defense. And the Soviets and their allies in Eastern Europe formed the Warsaw Pact in 1955, I believe, which was a response to this. So their version of NATO. NATO still exists today. The only time NATO has been militarily invoked was after September 11th, 2001. So another problem or concern would be nuclear proliferation. What does that mean? Spreading of nuclear technology. We know now with the United States, we were the first to develop nuclear weapons. Soviets spied on us and used our technology that they stole from us to launch their own nuclear weapons program. And ultimately, they had nuclear weapons themselves by the late 1940s. Since then, a number of other countries have gone nuclear. Britain, France, probably not too concerning. India, Pakistan, China, North Korea, maybe a little more concerning. So these are unstable regimes. You know, India and Pakistan have fought multiple wars against each other over the last 80 years or so. And now they both have nuclear weapons. So another war might be pretty nasty, shall we say. Human rights versus realpolitik. If the Cold War is to be thought of as a chess match, sometimes in chess you may have to sacrifice a pawn to get what you want. Which, you know, did we I don't know, do some rather nasty things during the Cold War, like maybe, I don't know, assassinate foreign leaders that were democratically elected? Yeah, well, at least once we did in Chile. But I think it was either Nixon or Kissinger said that the dictator we installed replace Augusto Pinochet. He's an SOB, but he's our SOB. Of course, Cold War is going to end. 1989, the Berlin Wall comes down. Communism collapses in Eastern Europe. Soviet Union begins to disintegrate. And by 1991, Christmas Day, 1991, Gorbachev resigns and the Soviet Union is no more. So we're going to enter into an unprecedented period of peace and democracy, freedom, and capitalism, right? Well, I'm old enough to remember the 1990s, and it really did feel that way for a time. But then 9/11 happened, and yeah, not so much, hasn't so much felt that way since then. We entered a period of globalization, which basically just means the world economy is connected and integrated as never before. Globalization is why you can go to Walmart and find pretty much nothing made in the United States, all made overseas, shipped over here. This has benefits, of course, because you can afford a whole lot more stuff because of this, because imports, it's cheaper to produce many things abroad than it is here, so we can afford more stuff. It has costs too, as you probably can guess, because if it's produced abroad, it means that those are jobs that are overseas and not here. So factory work, a lot of that has gone away in the last 40 plus years. Some of it's been automation, so it's not all outsourcing. It's not the only culprit here, but it is one of the culprits. But it's also why you can go to almost any country in the world and eat at McDonald's, because that's also a symptom of globalization. Or why the internet would be a symptom of it too. So it's a very big, complicated process. It's neither all good nor all bad, probably. Like everything, there are costs and there are benefits. We are the only superpower in the world as of right now. So go us. We are challenged by other countries and non-state actors. Will this dominance continue for the foreseeable future? Well, I think as long as we don't blow ourselves up, which is a possibility, I think there's a good chance it'll continue for a while longer anyway. Russia and China were thought to be big challengers to us, but Russia's sort of, as of me saying this, and things may change by the time you hear this, but the war's been going on there for 2 or 3 years, and in Ukraine, and they can't pacify Ukraine, so that certainly makes them seem a lot less scary than they previously were. China, with their total lockdowns with COVID, slowed their economic growth a whole lot too, and it'll be a while before that recovers. So again, as much as we may like to complain, things are perhaps better than they seem. And we'll stop right there. We'll come back in just a moment. So talk to you soon.